birthday. For every day I have on earth is given by so I will give my life, my all to love and...
Hi folks, hope you're okay. I just want to share with you some thoughts on the Prophet Muhammad, and it's from the scholar John C. Rankin, who's wrote a book on the Prophet, and he uses he uses the sources of the biographies of ancient Islamic biographers, basically. I'll just get this is from his blog, Monday, September 23rd, 2013, John Rankin blog. He writes, "In my studies about Islam across the years, I've read various biographies of Muhammad, and the most ancient, authoritative, and extant biography is that of Ibn Ishaq, written in the 2nd century H.E., 8th century AD, about 100 years after Muhammad's death. Ibn Ishaq is an honest historian, but also working with various sources, some trustworthy and some he questions. But in recording the primary sources that come from a known chain of custody back to Muhammad and his companions, Ibn Ishaq gives us Muhammad that Muslims have patterned themselves after some 1,400 years. My priority as a minister of the gospel is to serve religious and political economic liberty for all people equally, and such freedom is only possible for all people if first rooted in a true definition of terms. In the Garden of Eden, Yahweh Elohim gives us the choice between the fruit that is good and serves life and freedom, and the fruit that is evil and leads to death and slavery. My purpose in this new book, The Real Muhammad in the Eyes of Ibn Ishaq, is to let this candid profile of Muhammad become accessible and thus serve people's freedom and informed choice." So basically what he's doing, he's not actually critiquing Islam, but what he's doing is going back to early Islamic sources, early biographical sources of Muhammad, and by those sources, the life of Muhammad, just so that people can see for themselves what Muhammad was really like. And Rankin does a wonderful series on his blog, which I'll show you, but I can't show you. I've got different browsers open, so it's a bit difficult. But if you go on www.teii.org, and if you look at The Life of Muhammad by John C. Rankin, www.teii.org, and look at J.C. Rankin's long series on Muhammad. Series, and he does quite an extensive series on Muhammad, looking at the life of Muhammad and comparing it with Jesus. And I just want to share one or two of those highlights that I found interesting from his series. And you know, I would encourage you to get hold of the book and have a read of the book. So there's such a lot within such a short time, but I'll just read one or two things that I found really interesting. Sorry about this. So much. We'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get there. We're getting there. We're getting there. Okay, we're there now. So he writes, in this scene I am covering 40 vignettes of the life of Muhammad, the source of Ibn Ishaq Sirah, the most ancient, extant, and historically reliable biography of Muhammad. When Muhammad is a boy under the guardianship of his uncle Abu Talib, the Medo Christian monk named Bashara, the monk recognizes the seal of the prophethood between Muhammad's shoulders and says to Abu Talib, "Take your nephew back to his country and guard him carefully against the Jews, for by Allah, if they see him and know about him, what I know, they will do him evil. A great future lies before this nephew of yours, to take him home quickly." Then Rankin writes, when Jesus is a Jewish boy, his threat is from King Herod because of his messianic Jewishness. Though in his adulthood he is hated by much of the Jewish religious elite, the problem is that they are not being faithful Jews as they oppose the coming Messiah. Jesus also declares that salvation is from the Jews as he comes to fulfill the law of Moses. Rankin notes that the angel was pressing in on Muhammad at Muhammad's call to prophethood. We read, Jibril said, "Read." I said, "What shall I read?" He pressed me with it so tightly that I thought it was death. And then he let me go and said, "Read." I said, "What shall I read?" He pressed me with it again so that I thought it was death. Then he let me go and said, "Read." I said, "What shall I read?" He pressed me with a third, and so he goes on. And he notes, the calling of Jesus, says Rankin, is public with many eyewitnesses, that the angels revealed themselves to Joseph and Mary and the shepherds, and the Holy Spirit speaks through a prophet and prophetess in public. The idea of angelic coercion is foreign. His calling is affirmed among those being baptized by John and later with the disciples as the Father speaks from heaven for all to hear. "This is my Son whom I love, listen to him." And immediately his baptism, Jesus confronts and refuses the devil's temptations. Now, these are really interesting contrasting, but then it gets really insidious as the series goes on, because you begin to see that in Islam, in the life of Muhammad, in the development of Islam, there is reference to violence, and we see that right at the beginning. Rankin says, Muhammad immediately meets great resistance, and he preaches against polytheism that is embraced by the Arab tribes who congregate in Mecca. When he and a few followers are praying in Glen outside Mecca, a band of polytheists come up them while they were praying and rudely interrupt them. They blame them for what they were doing until it came to blows, and it was on this occasion that Sayyad said, "Smote a polytheist with the jawbone of a camel and wounded him. This was the first blood to be shed in Islam." Uncle Abu Talib protects him but never converts to Islam. And then Rankin says, the ethics of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount are opposite to such violence, highlighted in turning the other cheek to insult, not being affected by them. The love of enemies and praying for those who persecute us. Jesus died on the cross for the salvation of his enemies, and thus advances the kingdom of the gospel, not by assaulting his opponents, but in absorbing their assaults. Now, this long series and the book traces really the violence of Muhammad and the violence of early Islam, not in critiquing Islam, but just showing the sources, the reliable or best historical sources that Muslims use themselves and Muslim scholars today. And that's what I found, a contrast between, we turn to Matthew, we go to the book of Matthew. I would ask Muslims out there to read the Sermon on the Mount and then to go over the life of Muhammad and compare the Sermon on the Mount with the life of Muhammad. In Matthew chapter 5, we have these words in verse 3, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And each time when Muhammad was challenged in debate, he would close the debate down by quoting the Quran, or quoting a Quranic verse. Whereas Jesus never closed down debate. He was always willing to engage in hard questions. He was for people to ask him hard questions. And so, you know, in Jewish culture of that time, there was an encouragement to debate about the scriptures, not to use scriptures to close down debate. So there's a difference in intellectual honesty there. Also in equality, you know, Jesus says, I've come to serve and not to be served. Yet Muhammad, when he made treaties, the treaties that he made were he made those treaties, and he dominated the culture as he made those treaties, which is not the same as Jesus, who came to serve. It was for Muhammad, it was domination. The treaties that he made, and where he was allowed peace and allowed to get on, he didn't reciprocate. He didn't give back. You know, there was payback. Muhammad. Now, you might disagree with what I'm saying, but I think this series, especially on John Rankin's blog, Reverend John Rankin, rankin.blogspot.co.uk, and if you go onto his website, you can also find his series. And I find this guy, I don't fully agree with everything, but I find this guy quite scholarly and helpful on some issues, and I found him very helpful in reading the life of Muhammad. www.teii.org, and go on Islam, Mormonism, Atheism, and Paganism, and there you'll find a series on the life of Muhammad, and on his blog you will find a series of the life of Muhammad, and he has also published a book. So so what my point that I want to get across here is that when you compare Jesus of the Gospels, Jesus of the New Testament, specifically the Gospels, you compare him to the life of Muhammad using the sources of Muslim scholars, the best sources, without being critical of Muhammad, and just using those sources and looking honestly at the life of Muhammad, you see a stark contrast between a peace-loving Jesus, who is intellectually honest, willing to debate, willing to discuss, not come to dominate, and was not interested in violence and did not encourage violence. And at the same time, you have a life of Muhammad where there is an encouragement to violence, there is a closing, and there is domination. You know, there is political, social, and economic domination going on with the early days of Islam through Muhammad, whereas in Jesus there was no political, economic, social domination. His ministry was about service. So I just want to share that with you, and I hope that's a blessing to you. Thank you for listening, and God bless.